The early 1500s. The Ming Dynasty burned brightest at its zenith. Art exploded across the empire, culture pulsed through every province, and gold coursed through the realm like blood through arteries. But behind the forbidden city's crimson walls, poison began to spread. Foreign armies weren't battering down the gates. Famine wasn't stalking the countryside. The real threat had already slipped inside, carried by an unassuming man who'd discovered what no one else could grasp: how to turn an emperor into a marionette. Liu Jin understood something fundamental about power. Sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't forged in fire, but hidden in plain sight. In his private chambers, he treasured a simple folding fan. One flick of his wrist, and a blade would spring forth without even a whisper of sound. Forget clumsy swords or crude firearms. Liu Jin had turned murder into an art form. That fan told you everything you needed to know about the man himself. Refined beauty wrapped around cold steel, elegance that could kill you before you knew you were dying. Paranoia consumed his every breath. He lived each day certain someone would plant a dagger between his shoulder blades. That constant dread would eventually become his undoing, but first he would completely rewrite the game of power from the darkness. Fear transformed him into something lethal. In the end, that same fear would devour him alive. Liu Jin wasn't born with that name. He came into this world as Tan, just another poor boy whose family sold him to the palace like livestock. The knife that made him a eunuch did more than slice away flesh. It carved out his very identity. They ripped away his family, his birth name, his future as a man. The palace castrated his body and attempted to destroy his soul. But instead of crumbling under that brutality, he let it remake him. The boy who lost everything became obsessed with claiming what no one thought he deserved: real power, the kind that makes other men tremble. His chance arrived when young Zhu Huzhao took the throne. Here was an emperor drowning in his own restlessness, brilliant enough to rule an empire, yet suffocating under the weight of endless ceremonies and stuffy protocols. The old guard ministers treated him like a schoolboy who needed constant scolding. They saw weakness where Liu Jin recognized opportunity. While the court's gray-bearded advisors droned on about tax policy and border disputes, Liu Jin brought magic. He whispered about wrestling matches and exotic beasts from distant lands. He conjured up secret entertainments that no proper minister would dare suggest. Liu Jin became the emperor's escape hatch from a golden prison, the one person who made palace life feel alive instead of suffocating. Gradually, an emperor surrounded by 1,000 advisors learned to listen to just one voice: the castrated servant who somehow understood him better than anyone born to privilege ever could. This relationship defied every rule of imperial protocol. The ministers delivered lectures. Liu Jin offered his ear. They scolded the emperor's restless spirit. Liu Jin fed it with promises of adventure. He became something more dangerous than a servant. He became the emperor's drug dealer, supplying exactly what the young ruler craved most. That symbiotic bond handed Liu Jin keys to the kingdom. Together with his fellow eunuchs, the notorious 8 Tigers, he formed a shadow government that slithered into every corner of the palace. The emperor's blind devotion became their shield as they methodically devoured the state from within. Liu Jin's true masterstroke came when he seized control of the Directorate of Ceremonial. On paper, the position looked like glorified paperwork. In reality, he'd just become the empire's choke point. Every document destined for the emperor's eyes now traveled through Liu Jin's fingers first. Petitions for justice, urgent warnings, desperate pleas. He could crush them all before they ever reached the throne. His red-bound memorials became instruments of deception, filled with carefully crafted lies that painted exactly the picture he wanted the emperor to see. One flick of his wrist could erase a man from imperial consciousness forever. To protect his stranglehold on power, Liu Jin unleashed something genuinely terrifying: his own secret police force, the Inner Bureau. While existing spy networks already terrorized the population, Liu Jin's hunters prowled even deeper into the shadows. Their mission was brutally simple: find anyone foolish enough to question Liu Jin and destroy them. The palace transformed into a tomb of whispered conversations and coded warnings. Officials trembled at the mere thought of speaking his name aloud. One bureaucrat learned this lesson the hardest way possible. He dared to write "the eunuch Liu Jin" in an official document instead of using proper honorifics. Within hours, they dragged him from his home, beat him bloody, and threw him into a dungeon. His crime had nothing to do with treason. He'd simply forgotten to grovel with sufficient enthusiasm. Liu Jin perfected cruelty like an artist perfects brushstrokes. He dragged an ancient torture from the grave and made it his signature, the Kangyu method. Picture a massive wooden collar, heavy as a millstone, locked around a victim's neck. They'd be forced to their knees while that crushing weight slowly ground them down. Death came crawling, inch by agonizing inch, while crowds gathered to watch the spectacle. Liu Jin once sentenced an official to this nightmare for nothing more than disagreeing with a minor policy decision. The man knelt in the public square for days, slowly starving and collapsing under the weight, his suffering a billboard advertising Liu Jin's power. What possessed this man to orchestrate such horrors? You might expect grand ambitions or sweeping visions of reform. Instead, you'd find something far more pathetic: a bottomless hunger for respect from a world he was convinced despised him. Liu Jin constructed something far more personal than an empire, a fortress of gold and terror wrapped around his own wounded ego. The boy they'd tried to erase had grown into a man who needed constant proof that he mattered. His paranoia consumed him like acid. He trusted absolutely no one, including the fellow eunuchs who'd helped him climb to power. Liu Jin lived every moment braced for the knife between his shoulder blades, ready to strike first at enemies both real and imagined. That same fear that made him so dangerous would eventually devour him completely. The man who saw betrayal lurking in every shadow had guaranteed that betrayal would eventually find him. The emperor's devotion to Liu Jin knew no boundaries. Yet where a million ministers had failed, a tiny rebellion in a forgotten province would succeed. Liu Jin's destruction began thousands of miles away in Ningxia, where a reckless prince had raised his banner against the throne. But this rebel possessed a cunning that cut straight to the heart of imperial politics. He declared his war against the emperor's corruption, specifically naming his mission as destroying the traitorous eunuch Liu Jin. Liu Jin received news of the rebellion with his usual cold calculation, but the rebel's public declaration struck him like a blade between the ribs. After years of enforced silence, someone had finally given voice to the empire's buried hatred. The words echoed across the realm, and for the first time, Liu Jin felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The court dispatched General Yang Yiqing to crush the uprising, accompanied by Zhang Yang, one of Liu Jin's fellow 8 tigers. Zhang Yang had once stood shoulder to shoulder with Liu Jin in their rise to power, but resentment had been eating away at their bond like rust. Liu Jin's endless appetite for wealth and his suffocating arrogance had poisoned whatever loyalty once existed between them. During their long march back to the capital, Yang Yiqing and Zhang Yang discovered they shared a common enemy. Yang Yiqing, both scholar and soldier, recognized Liu Jin as a cancer spreading through the empire's vital organs. Zhang Yang, patient and calculating, saw him as something more personal, a former brother who had grown too dangerous to live. Together, they hatched a plan as audacious as it was perilous. They would turn Liu Jin's own weapons against him, using the very system of surveillance and terror he had created to orchestrate his downfall. The plan balanced on one critical truth. The emperor still trusted Zhang Yang completely. He would deliver the killing stroke. As they neared the capital, Liu Jin's controlling instincts kicked in. He dispatched a courier with precise orders. Zhang Yang must slip into the city quietly, avoiding any public spectacle. Liu Jin refused to let his rival bask in glory or gain precious moments alone with the emperor. The people needed to see only one hero, and that hero would be Liu Jin himself. Zhang Yang crushed those orders underfoot. When he and Yang Yiqing reached the capital, they marched through the gates like conquering heroes, banners flying and crowds roaring their approval. The entire city exploded in celebration. Liu Jin watched from his palace windows, fury boiling in his chest, powerless to stop the spectacle unfolding below. Every instinct screamed danger. The paranoia that had made him untouchable now hammered against his skull like war drums. That evening's imperial banquet would become the stage for his destruction. Guests feasted and laughed while tension crackled through the air like lightning before a storm. Zhang Yang approached the emperor carrying a golden box containing the rebel prince's severed head. The emperor's face glowed with satisfaction at this grisly trophy. Then Zhang Yang struck. He dropped to his knees and let his voice slice through the music and celebration, but he spoke nothing of military victory. Instead, he began cataloging Liu Jin's crimes. Word by word, he peeled back years of deception, revealing how Liu Jin had strangled communication between emperor and empire, destroyed honest officials with lies, and transformed the government into his personal treasury. Zhang Yang painted a picture of bottomless greed and ultimate treachery, Liu Jin's secret plan to steal the dragon throne itself. The emperor's face drained of all color. Triumph crumbled into something hollow and terrible as he stared first at Zhang Yang, then at Liu Jin, who stood frozen like carved stone. The accusation hit the emperor with the force of a physical blow. The man he'd cherished above all others, his escape from the suffocating world of imperial duty, had been manipulating him like a chess piece. Every moment of friendship, every shared laugh, every secret confidence had been calculated deception. Reality crashed down on him in waves. A rebellion had erupted specifically to destroy Liu Jin. Thousands had died because of the hatred his closest friend had inspired across the empire. The emperor realized with sickening clarity that he'd become a stranger in his own court, dancing to the tune of a castrated boy who'd never stopped thirsting for revenge against the world. Betrayal transformed the young emperor's face into something unrecognizable. He rose from the dragon throne, his voice erupting from somewhere deep and primal. The words came out like hammer blows. Arrest Liu Jin immediately. In that instant, the most feared man in China became powerless as a child. The terror machine he'd spent years perfecting now turned its grinding gears toward him. His former allies watched with cold satisfaction as guards seized the man who'd held their leashes for so long. Liu Jin, who had lived every day expecting this moment, finally faced the knife he'd been dodging his entire life. The fear that had made him untouchable had finally devoured him whole. The night air bit through the darkness like a blade. Liu Jin, who had ruled through fear for so long, found himself dragged from his silk-wrapped sanctuary by the same imperial guards who once trembled at his name. The hunter had become prey. When they ransacked his mansion, the full horror of his greed spilled out like a wound. Gold and silver filled every room to the ceiling, mountains of stolen treasure that glittered in the torchlight like captured stars. His personal vault held riches that made emperors weep with envy, over 12 million ounces of gold and 259 million ounces of silver. The wealth inside those walls could have funded the empire for years. Yet the treasure paled beside what they found locked away in his private chambers. A sealed chest yielded secrets far more damning than gold. A forged imperial seal lay nestled beside military armor sized for his frame, along with an arsenal of concealed weapons, including blades hidden within that innocent-looking fan he carried everywhere. These artifacts told a story of ultimate betrayal. Liu Jin hadn't just been stealing from the empire, he'd been planning to seize it entirely. When word reached the emperor, his rage transcended political fury and became something deeply personal. The man he'd trusted with his innermost thoughts, his refuge from the crushing weight of power, had been scheming to steal his throne from the very beginning. Every shared moment had been a lie. Every confidence had been weaponized against him. The sentence came down swift and merciless. Death by Lingchi, the 1,000 cuts. But this execution would become something far grander than simple justice. The emperor was giving his people theater, a blood-soaked spectacle to wash away years of silent suffering. News of Liu Jin's fate raced through the capital like wildfire. Streets that had whispered in terror now exploded with savage joy. The city transformed into a macabre festival as vendors hawked food and wine to the gathering crowds. After years of cowering in Liu Jin's shadow, the people were finally going to watch their nightmare die, one slice at a time. The execution unfolded like a nightmare choreographed by hell itself. 3 days stretched ahead of Liu Jin, each hour promising agony that would redefine human suffering. They dragged him to the very platform where he'd condemned so many others to die, the wooden planks still stained with the blood of his victims. The crowd's roar crashed over him like a tsunami of pure hatred, voices that had been silenced for years finally erupting in savage triumph. The executioner moved with the cold precision of a master craftsman. His blade caught the morning light as he prepared to begin the most methodical form of murder ever devised. The first incisions whispered across Liu Jin's skin, shallow and calculated, designed to preserve life while amplifying torment. 3,357 cuts would follow, each one recorded by imperial scribes like a grotesque inventory. This ritual demanded more than death. It required the complete erasure of a human being, carved away piece by agonizing piece. Day 1 became an education in suffering. The executioner's knife worked with surgical patience, peeling away strips of flesh while Liu Jin's screams echoed off the surrounding buildings. They forced water down his throat and bread past his lips, keeping him tethered to consciousness so he could experience every slice, every nerve ending screaming in protest. As darkness fell, Liu Jin still drew breath through a body transformed into raw meat. The mob watched with the ravenous attention of wolves circling wounded prey. This broken, bleeding thing had once held absolute power over their lives, had crushed their voices and terrorized their families. Now he belonged to them completely, and they savored every moment of his destruction. On the second day, the ritual dragged on, darker and more merciless than before. The blades carved deeper, slicing into his organs, his limbs, his face, as if trying to reach the very center of his cruelty. The pain was beyond anything the body should endure, yet it only fueled the crowd's hunger. They weren't just watching punishment. They were watching justice take shape, cut by agonizing cut. They wanted to see him unravel. The man who had once made the empire tremble. Then came the third day. With one final thrust, his heart was pierced. Silence fell. The man who had ruled with more power than even the emperor lay still, stripped of breath and identity, a broken shell of blood and bone. But death wasn't enough. The crowd surged forward. In a last, terrible act of retribution, they tore through the execution ground. Pieces of his flesh were bought, passed from hand to hand, and consumed. This was not madness, it was ritual. A symbolic feast, not of meat, but of vengeance. They devoured the tyrant to cleanse the empire of his evil, to reclaim what had been taken from them in silence and fear. It was more than revenge, it was release. What remains after a story soaked in blood and betrayal? After the last scraps of flesh were swallowed and the mob finally drifted away, the empire exhaled. For the first time in years, it could breathe. The monster was gone. In the wake of Liu Jin's death, the response was immediate and ruthless. There was no mourning, no hesitation. The emperor, shaken by the depths of treachery that had festered in his own court, acted swiftly. Liu Jin's sprawling network of corruption was torn apart. His allies were hunted down, stripped of power, and cast out. The vast fortune he had hoarded was seized and returned to the imperial treasury. It was as much a statement as it was an act of justice. For a moment, the balance felt restored. The same officials who had once trembled at his whisper now spoke without fear. They stood taller, their spines no longer bent beneath the weight of his shadow. Order returned, or at least the illusion of it. The court moved forward, cloaked in a delicate calm, trying to forget how close it had come to surrendering itself to one man's appetite for control. But Liu Jin's reign was never just a passing nightmare. It was a warning etched in flesh and fear, a parable of power that reaches beyond its own century. His story was never only about a corrupt eunuch or a naive emperor. It was something deeper, a stark reminder of one terrible truth. Fear is a weapon, and no one can hold it without bleeding. You can build a kingdom on it. You can rule through silence and terror. But the moment you let your guard slip, that same fear will shift in your hands. It will turn, and it will cut. Liu Jin did not fall because of a noble uprising or a sudden awakening of justice. His end was not a moment of heroism. It was the natural collapse of a structure built entirely on distrust. He believed in no one, and when the time came, there was no one left who believed in him. He was not betrayed by men of honor. He was betrayed by men who feared him more than they feared death. Zhang Yong, once his ally, watched Liu Jin's greed grow unchecked, knowing that sooner or later he would be next. Their plot was not born from principle, but from self-preservation. It was a quiet, deliberate strike against a monster that had grown too large to control. And the very instruments Liu Jin had forged to dominate others became the roots of his downfall. The spies he trained, the networks he built, the fear he spread, all turned against him. He ruled through silence, but that silence became a trap. No one warned him, no one stood by him. He was a prisoner in the kingdom he had shaped, a man at the height of power, entirely alone. The fear that once protected him now left him exposed. He became so dangerous, so deeply mistrusted, that the only way to survive was to destroy him. In the end, the creature he had created turned inward. The snake devoured itself. Liu Jin's story is not confined to the past. It still echoes through the present. The faces may change, the titles may shift, but the machinery of power and control remains chillingly familiar. His legacy lives on in the eyes of modern regimes, in constant surveillance, in the quiet stifling of free thought, in the way dissent disappears without a sound. The aim is always the same: to shape a world ruled by fear, where silence feels safer than truth, and every act becomes a potential threat. But his life and death also offer a profound sense of hope, a brutal testament to the fact that such systems are not built to last. A tyranny founded on terror is inherently unstable. It lacks the moral and popular support needed for long-term survival. Just as the Ming people's terror turned to a bloody, cannibalistic rage, so too do the oppressed eventually find a way to reclaim their power, often in a form more savage than the one they had endured. In the end, what defined Liu Jin wasn't his power or his wealth, but his profound solitude. He died alone, betrayed by the very people he thought he controlled. His final moment of agony was a testament not only to the justice of the court, but to the collective vengeance of a people who had finally had enough. His story echoes through time as a warning to those who mistake control for invincibility. A tale that warns against a life consumed by greed, a mind consumed by paranoia, and a reign consumed by fear. The dagger he hid in his fan was meant to protect him from the world, but it was his fear, the very thing it represented, that killed him. He was a man with a secret weapon, and in the end, that secret weapon was turned on him,